Welcome to WiseGuides Enrolled Agent Review course. My name's Arthur Reed and I'm going to be your instructor for all three parts of the exam. And to be perfectly honest, I'm real excited about this. I'm excited that you're taking a step in your professional career to become an enrolled agent. This test that we're going to be going through, to be absolutely clear on it, is a difficult exam. It's harder than the CPA exam in terms of its tax pieces of it. There are concepts that I cover in this area that I don't cover even in my classroom when I teach at Bentley University. So it's rigorous. There's a lot of landscape to cover, but it's also a lot of fun. I love teaching tax, and I'm so glad you're here. And what will happen is that when you're done with the review course, you'll be an enrolled agent. And you'll be able to change your website. You'll be able to put EA or enrolled agent or enrolled to practice before the IRS. I'm sure you've already gone through and made some adjustments to, like, when I pass this exam or when I complete this last part, this is what I'm going to do. But we really want the review course to not only simply prepare you for the exam, but also to get you into that learning process where you're continually looking at new information and being basically a leader in your field as a tax professional, and this designation will certainly help. I'm going to talk a little bit about the exam at this point in time, and then we're going to get into some specifics a little bit later. But right now, as far as we call it the enrolled agent exam, but it's really technically called the special enrollment examination. So if you see that online when you go, it's like, whoa, is this the same test? The answer is it is the same exam. There are three parts to it. One's for individuals, one for business, and one for representation, practices, and procedure. In the individuals part, it's usually the area where a lot of people feel more comfortable because they've done a lot of 1040s. They've prepared some Schedule A's and B's and maybe even some Schedule C's in some parts. But you oftentimes have familiarity with this topic, and we oftentimes say this is like an area that I would like to start with, simply because of that familiarity. It looks at filing statuses of taxpayer. It looks at what is income, what are the components of income, what are some of the deductions and tax credits that taxpayers have. So it's in that grouping that we have, and there's a pretty big landscape now, especially due to the fact that we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at the end of 17 passed, and now that became law, and we are now living in that area, so that's pretty exciting. The part two for businesses, if you're not involved with ever filing a corporate tax return, a partnership, possibly an S corporation, then this is going to be new information, and we go a little bit slower in those areas to make sure that you're comfortable with not just the material, but also the questions that the examiners may ask you. It's a closed exam, so we don't have the questions that the examiners will give you, but we do have lots of questions in our databases, and I use a lot of those as we go through and say this is what they've asked before, this is what we think they'll be asking in those areas we go through. But I love the business part of it because realistically, individuals is fun, but the bulk of my income as a tax professional comes from the business side of things, not from the individuals, but it's the individuals that usually brought me to the businesses, so it's an important role that you'll take as a tax professional. And the third part of it, which is representation, practices, and procedure, that's the area that I get to teach at the graduate level at Bentley. And it basically deals with all this cool stuff, except for electronic filing, which is in here. I fortunately don't have to teach that. But all the other parts about representing your clients during an audit, going to collections or appeals. What are some of the different rules that we have there in terms of Circular 230 and ethics? It's a wonderful area to go through, and it's, again, it's one of the areas out of all the ones that I teach, it's the one that I love, and it's the one that I routinely come in and out of this in my practice. So I think as you see these three parts of the exam from my perspective, I'm going to try to bring a different angle to each one of them as we go through. Let me talk a little bit about the exam. I'm going to give you an overview, and we're going to look at a couple things in a minute. In an overview, the exam goes for 3.5 hours. We talk to candidates periodically, you know, what was your experience, how did you like it, things like that. And many of them, especially in perhaps a part 3, don't need 3.5 hours to take the test, but you're given that amount of time. Everyone's a different test taker, so it's really kind of hard to figure out exactly how much time to complete, but they're not going to kick you out until the 3.5 hours are over with. In addition, while there are 100 questions per exam, only 85 of those questions will count towards your final grade. And that's because they have experimental questions I'll get to in just a second. There are 3 types of questions that you're going to be given. One's called a direct question, One's called an incomplete sentence, and the other one is like all of the following except. So those are the types of the styles of the questions that you will see on the exam. I'm going to show you an example which comes right out of their publication of what each one of these looks like, so you sort of get a feel. It's sort of like having a professor that when all the people before you have said, oh, this person, they love to test this area, or they write their questions this way. As a student, you say, you know, how many essays are going to be on the exam or whatever. You want to know this, and that's kind of what the structure of the question is helpful, getting used to what they're going to look like. In addition to that, all questions have an equal value. The only reason I say this, in the past, when the exam was issued, and you can find these exams online, they had complicated or computational questions, they had non-computational questions, and they had true, false, and they all had equal values. So in case you're looking at some of those online, they don't exist anymore. Every question has the same weight. They provide a passing score of 105 as what the standard is to pass this thing, and that's on a scale of 40 to 130. Go figure. You're taking 85 questions that'll count, and that equates to like a 75. But we don't know. We don't know. They just give us a scale. I'm like, okay, that sort of fits in that range. So that gives you some idea of what your passing scores look like. It's a passing score. That's about all we can say. And we don't know what scale exists or anything along those lines. And as I mentioned before, while the exam has 85 questions in total, 100 questions in total, 85 will count, 15 will not count. They're called experimental, but they don't say, hey, here's an experimental question. Don't worry if you get it right or not. But sometimes if you see a question on the exam, it's like, where did that one come from? That could be an experimental question. So just keep that in mind as you go through in the actual sitting for the exam, that you'll only grade it on 85, and you don't get to pick and choose the 85 that you want to be tested on. So let's take a look at a direct question, an incomplete sentence, and all of the following except, so you get a feel for what these questions look like. So the first one, which of the following entities are required to file a Form 709, which is the United States gift tax return? And so of these, you've got a possible individual, and an estate or trust, a corporation, or all of the above. When we cover the area which is in part one, but when we cover this, you'll know that the answer will be an individual. They're the ones that have to file a gift tax return. So that would be basically a direct question. Here's a question, which one? And you'll notice that there are some all of the above answers as well as a possibility. Let's take a look at an incomplete sentence. So basically you're going to complete the sentence, so then it's not an incomplete sentence anymore. Supplemental wages are compensation paid in addition to an employee's regular wages. They do not include payments for accumulated sick pay, non-deductible moving expenses, which is really like almost all moving expenses now, vacation pay, or travel reimbursements paid at the federal government per diem rate. Well, it's the travel reimbursements, which is the payments that are not included, so they do not include payments for travel reimbursements at the per diem rate. So that's basically the rule that we would have here, but that's an example of what we would consider to be an incomplete sentence. And then the last one is basically all of the following except. There are 5 tests which must be met to claim exemption for a dependent. Now, just to let you know, this came out of their publication, not my publication. I would not structure this like this under the new tax law, because we're really not getting an exemption per se and our exemption amount. So things are a little bit different here, but they come up with these tests, and I think it illustrates a point that's important, which is not a requirement. You need to be a citizen, a member of the household, a relationship test. I think we know that. Disability is not one of the requirements. It might qualify if you're blind for an extra standard deduction, but certainly not for an exemption amount. And a joint return test is also one of those. So basically you're looking for, so all the other ones are good except for this one. So you've got 3 right answers and 1 wrong answer. And quite honestly, I actually like these style questions almost the most, because it helps at least confirm to us what are the good answers as opposed to what are bad answers. And really, sometimes to come up with a bad answer on an exam is kind of hard. It's like, what would I actually do to create a bad answer when I have so many good answers to go by? Let me tell you a little bit about what we do in the review course. Our approach is actually multifaceted as we go through and do it. I do an overview to an area. So I'm going to be telling you about a specific topic within a specific group. So I'm going to be covering that in detail. But before we do that, I want to know, like, this is the area, this is the things that we're going to be looking at within this part, within these sections. And the idea is to set the framework in your head in terms of what it is that you can come to expect within this group. I'm then going to do a concise lecture on the topic. I really try to minimize how much I say in this way, but I'm told I talk too much sometimes, so please bear with me in some of these, because I get excited about it, and I said, oh, I want them to know about this, and I know about that. But realistically, if you realize that the entire Part 3, Part 2, Part 1, each one of those is only going to have 100 questions, and my lectures go for a long time, is that I will hopefully more than cover the material that you're going to be tested on as we go through it, but there's still even more beyond that. To truncate it down to a small group is hard to do, so I'll try to be as concise as I can on the specific topic that we're dealing with. I'm also going to display forms for you, and I think that this is one of the real great things we get to do on the WiseGuides platform, is that we have a lot of great technology which is going to help deliver the course to you in the easiest possible format, so we're not jumping around trying to get all kinds of crazy things all the time. So for example, if I'm looking at forms, this is a form 4562. This is one that I had used a little bit earlier when I was talking about depreciation. And when we have a depreciation form, and let me just show you up here, is that when we have depreciation, there's all this stuff in here, and if you're looking at it, you almost go blind trying to figure out what it is. And so what I'll do periodically is I'll go through and I'll highlight things. And what I'll try to do within that is I'll say, all right, let's take a look at, for example, under, again, we're looking at the 4562, what's the maximum amount that we can have? And the laws have changed in here, so when I cover this area within the depreciation part, which is in Part 2 of businesses, I'll be talking specifically about those rules. When that happens, I will also then try to, in places that are good to go through, and I'll just give you a couple examples in here, is I'll start breaking it down into, there are also thresholds for the cost before any reductions. What is the reduction in the limitation for the year? We talk about listed property, which gets smaller as well. We come up with tentative deductions with the smaller of one versus the other. We deal with the business income limitation and put that information in as well. And so what we do is I try to highlight the forms for the parts that are important, so that it's just not a concept we're talking about, but rather I'm actually going to the form as appropriate in specific areas that I think are important to cover at that juncture. We also take a look at publications, which was the next part on my bullet point. I'll just get to that. And I don't know if you're into farms or anything, but there's a section in the businesses on specialized returns dealing with farms. And it's like, who knew? Well, I knew, but maybe you didn't know, and maybe you've never depreciated a cow before or sold some. I mean, there's all kinds of things in here which are like really so cool to look at. But what I'd like to be able to do is to take a look at the examples. And the reason I like to look at examples in publications is that the IRS is the preparer of this exam. They come from them. They write these publications. They want you to read them. And as you read them, you get all this information about the exam in terms of like possible content or possible questions. And so frequently you'll say, I remember this. This was about a taxpayer that had a drought. And when that area had a drought, they basically sold some extra, as a result of the drought, they basically sold some extra cattle during that period. And it talks about how much you realized, and the income that you can postpone until the next year is that amount of money, $61,250. And so I work examples like this. This is one that I actually did work within there, but they'll give you example after example. Now, I got to be honest with you people, there are a lot of publications out there. And one of the concerns that I always have as we go through this is that you as a candidate have responsibility to look at these as well. I'm going to show you something a little bit later relating to what the IRS gives you is what's called a tax map to help you in your process as well. But when I refer to a publication, I'm trying to pull out what I consider to be the best of that specific topic, that specific area, to illustrate the things that I think the examiners might test you on in the exam. Publications are much, much bigger. than what I cover. So please, if I say, hey, take a look at this specific publication, the instructions. After a while, the publications and the instructions are almost say the same thing, but sometimes one clarifies something beforehand, but then you know the topic. So your responsibility is to look at that. My responsibility is to guide you through as much of the material as I can. In addition to that, I will work selected questions. When you work out at the gym or you have an event or a party or something like that, do you have a playlist? You know, the songs that you really like to play? We do. And it's a great part of saying, like, yeah, that's one of Dad's songs, and even though the kids may not like it all the time, but I like it. And so I have my own playlist. I have my own playlist for the enrolled agent exam. I've gone through all of the chapters, all of the sections, all of these for a number of years, and begin to try to say, all right, in the content specs, this is where they're focusing on what's the type of question they're going to see. So as I go through a specific part, like say part 3, I know that I have a test bank of questions that I'm going to be covering here by selecting things and saying, here's a question that we need to go through, and let's work through it. I will probably go 90, 100 questions on this, on that type of approach by working a real multiple choice question. Plus I work many, many true-false questions. I'll get that one up there as well, because the true-false questions are still applicable questions as far as content go, even though you won't see those on the exam. So I use those to drive home the point. The majority of the questions that we work have been asked in the past, and of course modified for new tax laws as we go ahead. Let me give you an example of just one of those so you can see what that might look like. And I'm going to grab this one right here. And this one had to do with the collections area, just to give you some idea of where this felt. So this was basically a part 3 area. And it basically says, just to go through this, generally, how long does the IRS have to collect outstanding federal taxes? So that's really a question that is a good question. And if you didn't know it, then maybe this is a good time to cover it before I cover it. But if you notice in this side over here, all of these guys are 10. So obviously the answer is 10. It's not 3-year statute of limitations, but it's 10. And now it's like I've got all these options. Is it from the due date of the return? Is it from the date the return is filed? Is it from the date of the notice of deficiency? Or it is the date of the assessment? Now, I'm not giving you a test right now, so you don't have to worry about that, but those are 4 viable answers, and none of them are crazy. They're all viable, but like, which is the right one? And in case you are wondering, it is from the date of the assessment. But we will work through these in conjunction with the lecture that I covered, because this is like, I don't want to call it a factoid, but it's something that you should remember. It's something that you should be able to bring into the exam when that day comes. And so what I'll do is I'll work selected problems, which will help reinforce some of those issues. And so that's part of the process that we go through, is selecting all of these cool things to talk about. So let me just wrap up with just 2 thoughts at this point. Number 1, testing window, it's changed. If you're viewing this thing before June 30th, this video, the 2017 year really, it was a tax year that is like, as far as I'm concerned, it's 100 years ago. But due to the government shutdown, the IRS did not have the exam ready. So what they said is that from May 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, they're going to be testing the old material. I don't even want to know. I'm trying to put all that 2017 material behind me. I teach, okay? This is what I do. I'm also a practicing CPA as well, and I sometimes have to go back and do amended returns. I don't want to look at 17 anymore. I get confused when I'm like, all right, here's the rule for which year. You have to think about it for a moment. The 2018 material, which is basically the new tax law, is going to be tested starting July 1st, 2019 through February 28th, 2020. So that's our big window. And so as we begin to look at these, there are obviously some concerns of going back and trying to relearn what you did in 17 as opposed to go to 2018 material. And so one of the recommendations we have is to go to part 3 first, because that has the least amount of changes as we go through and do this. But to give you an idea for the testing window, just in case you haven't heard any other things or pronouncements, this was relatively new that they just came out with it as we've been walking through. So here's what I'm going to show you right now, is that this site is like real important to go in and basically register and get going so you start your path to becoming an enrolled agent right away. Go to the website. I'm going to click on this in just a moment. The exam is basically administered by Prometric, not by the IRS. They create the questions and the proper responses, but Prometric handles it. Print out the candidate information bulletin. This is critical. This is where so many of the mechanical aspects of the things that you have to do to sit for the exam are covered. I'm not going to go through, you have to do this, you have to do that. You can read, you're a bright person. There's no reason for me to go through this. I'm going to point some things out, but bottom line is that you can do that. Complete the form 2857, just make sure that's what gets it going. And the cost is, I put down only $184.97 per part. So in case you see some other numbers out there, this is according to that. So what I want to do is I want to end with basically a link to the Prometric site. And when I do this, I'll just do it one more time. Here we go. Is that this is the site to look at. They talk about the test sponsors, the special agent enrollment exam. And what was really exciting is this line right here. Registration is open from May 1st to February 29th. That's the testing, what we call the testing window. And through this area in this testing window, and this is like your splash page to basically see what's going on, there's very little information other than this. The government shutdown has delayed the annual revision of the special enrollment examination. It'll be starting May 1st and has not yet been updated to reflect the new laws. So it'll be dealing with 2017. A revised examination will be released July 1st and based on the new tax law for 2018. So that's what's happening in this area. Hopefully you've heard about this beforehand, and in doing that it'll help change what your plan is. But here's the things that they tell you to do. Create an account, review the candidate information bulletin, and then it says down here, review the exam content outlines. There's one content outline for June 30th, 2019, and then after July 1st, 2019, so there's another set. So this is the old set up above, this is the new set down below, and this is the ones we want you to take because that's the season you just came off of. It makes the most sense to basically deal with this. I also just want to point out one other thing within this grouping, and that is that there's a frequently asked questions. There's a tutorial on how to basically touch and feel the software that you're going to use on the site at that point in time. It's also test drive your examination for free, what to expect on test day, and sample questions and answers. They have a series of questions that they came up with, and they haven't released these before, pertaining to the enrolled agent exam. I've looked at these. I'm comfortable with the material that's in there. I think some of them are really hard, and I think some of them are quite straightforward. And so it never hurts to see what the examiners talk about in terms of what they are giving you as the sample questions. So with that, I want to thank you for joining the WiseGuides team. You're going to love the material that I go through. We're going to have a lot of fun working through many different topics and parts. I'm just excited because I know what's ahead of you as we go through and do it. So I look forward to seeing you in our first part.